upstate New York. And one time, the friend visited the Adirondacks. And for years and years and years, his New York friends had told him how gorgeous the mountains in the Adirondacks were. What a beautiful, beautiful place it was with so many wondrous things to see. And so the friend arrives and is visiting, and they're driving him all over and showing him all of these beautiful, beautiful places that mean so much to their hearts. And they get back to the house and they say, tell us, how do you like the scenery here in these wondrous Adirondack mountains of New York State? And the Texas friend thought for a second and said, well, I guess it's pretty, if only all of these mountains and trees weren't in the way. Some people are flatlanders. They enjoy that wide expanse with a horizon that completely encircles them, unbroken by anything. They like knowing that a bicycle ride isn't going to include any of those horrible, horrible uphill rides or those sometimes terrifying downhill ones. They like the predictability of wide plains. They like to be able to see the weather as it approaches. Everything feels wide open. Nothing is hidden. There are no dangers that are not seen. Nothing crowding in. It's not me. Not me. Give me hills and mountains any day. And water. Over the years, I've come to deeply appreciate the sounds and smells of the ocean, and I love coming down the 101, and I can look one direction and see the mountains, and I can look the other direction and see the ocean, and if it's a clear day and there's not a whole lot of marine layer, I can see the islands out there. More than once, I've seen whales driving in my car. It's become a place that is beautiful for me. And of course, growing up in Pittsburgh, everything is on a hill. Everything is on a hill. Even we drove up the hill to get into our garage, and then you had to go up 3 steps from our garage to get into our basement. I'm serious. And driving on streets in Pittsburgh, it's not unusual to look at a house that's like that, and you look on the other side of the street, and right at eye level with you as you're in your car are the bedrooms on the 2nd floor of those people's homes as you go down to their houses. I find it terribly difficult to live anywhere that didn't have wonderful hills and mountains and now expanses of water. We all have our comfortable places. We all have our comfortable people. Places that feel right to us, that just, they're right. And people who make us feel as if we're at home. It's comfortable like an old worn pair of jeans that has stretched itself out in just the right places, or those sneakers that have conformed themselves to those odd bumps on your feet that have grown, and who knows how they got there over the years. But sometimes being comfortable is not a good thing. If we read the verses that surround today's passage, the second one in Deuteronomy, we see some interesting facts. The distance that was covered by the Hebrew people in the Exodus should have taken them, the writer of Deuteronomy tells us, about 11 days walking. But the scripture tells us it took them 40 years. That's a bit of a discrepancy, isn't it? There were lots of reasons for it. There's a theological reason for it, that their sin, the sin of those who left Egypt, had to be done away with before this generation could enter the promised land. They had to all die off. Even Moses wasn't allowed to go into the promised land. But I think there's more than that going on here. The people had become comfortable. They'd grown accustomed to life as nomads. There was an entire generation here who knew nothing else. All they had done is wander in the wilderness. And as nomadic lives go, theirs was pretty easy because God was with them. The scriptures tell us that they had a pillar of fire that kept them warm at night and kept the wild animals away. And they had a cloud that covered them during the day that protected them from the heat of the desert sun. God was there with them. We're told that they had enough food and enough water, neither of which is always guaranteed when you're wandering around in the desert. But God provided that for them. Never too much. Never too much, but always enough. They'd learned to love sitting by the campfire at night and sharing a meal, laughing as the flames danced. And maybe on a night when they felt like they really needed to be touched by beauty and wonder, they wandered away from the camp out into the desert and could see the millions and millions of stars that are only visible when you're that far outside of everything else. This wilderness and these mountains had become their home. They were comfortable there. They were comfortable there. And they were comfortable with the people that they had encountered over these 40 years. They knew what to expect. They knew who to avoid. They knew who to seek out. They knew who had goods to trade, the things that they would want, and who would extend hospitality to them. And they knew who was not so friendly. It was a comfortable place. And God told them in that little passage I read, okay, you've been in your comfortable place long enough. It's time to move on. That meant danger. God tells them, don't pick a fight with the descendants of Esau or the Moabites, because God would not be on your side. I think that was basically a euphemism, is if you pick a fight with these guys, folk, you're going to lose. You're going to lose. And I'm sure as they heard that word, they wondered, now, did God tell them that God wasn't going to be on our side? Has God left us vulnerable to them? Or maybe God told them, no, leave these people alone, because they're headed north to someplace new. There they were, in their comfortable place, a place where God was with them, where they had experienced blessing after blessing, where they knew miracles, where they knew that they were God's people together. And suddenly God says, okay, you've wandered around this mountain long enough. Go north. Leave your comfortable place where you have known my presence, where you know what to expect, because I have something new. It's the promised land. But getting there involves discomfort and change. Staying here where you're comfortable will mean you will never experience the fulfillment of my promise to you. Staying here where you're comfortable means you will have less of what I have for you. Staying here where you're comfortable, where everything feels right and easy and good, means you won't get to the promised land. This is our comfortable place, isn't it? The weather, well, even when it's bad, it's not bad. More than once I've teased Cheryl. I've said, Cheryl, once I retire, we could move back to Pittsburgh. She says not nice things to me. When she's really being generous, she just says, write me letters. The power of the ocean here, the beauty of the mountains, the expanse of the sky, produce, fresh produce all of the time. And these are people with whom we're comfortable. Friends with whom we've shared more than we could or would tell. Well, the Hebrew children had spent 40 years in their comfortable place. Probably wasn't their comfortable place when they first started, just like for all of us, this wasn't necessarily our comfortable place. Some of us moved here from back in Michigan a generation ago. Others of us have come from other places, and it wasn't, it was beautiful, but it wasn't home. But now it's home. You're God's home. They had been there 40 years, and in that culture, 40 isn't always a literal number. Sometimes it just indicates a complete time. It means that everything that was supposed to get done in that period was done, and it was finished. It was a marker that a chapter had ended and a new one was beginning. When I first arrived here in Goleta, it was kind of a fun time because 40 was a year. It was the 40th anniversary of this church. And we were getting ready to celebrate it then. So it was both literal and metaphoric because a new chapter was beginning with a new pastor just showing up. And as I talked with people, I learned about 40 years of experiencing God's presence and knowing God's leading. We looked back, but it was also a new beginning. It had been a generally comfortable place. And then the call of God had come to leave that comfortable place. One Sunday, David Siegel stood up in church, and I understand it was not a whole lot of warning that he gave. He stood up and said, "I'm leaving. I'm moving on." And everybody said, "Oh. And a pastoral change was thrust on the church, and a search committee did its way, and they met with me on other folk. And they said, "We want you to come and be our pastor." And they brought us out here to Greater Santa Barbara, and we saw this place and had our breath taken away. And we drove down 101 coming back from Lompoc, where I had done a neutral pulpit. And Alexis was sitting in the back seat of the car crying, and she said, "We're going to move here, aren't we?" Yeah, I think so. Cambridge Drive had been circling a mountain long enough, but it was time to head north. A new chapter had begun, and it wasn't the same as the last one. It wasn't an easy transition. I did things differently than previous pastors had done. And for me to transition from being an urban guy in the capital of New York State to the chill Gold Coast of California, it was weird. For at least a year, I thought I was on vacation. I'd walk out and I'd see palm trees. I'd go, yeah. Oh yeah, I gotta work. I traded pizza, real pizza, they still don't have it here, for tacos. Real tacos. They didn't have those in New York. I traded the Hudson River for the Pacific Ocean. I traded at least 5 seasons. We have a 5th season in upstate New York called mud season, and some years it happens twice. For what seemed to me like one season, just springtime all the time here. All of that is just to remind us that we've been in that place before, where we have been comfortable, where we have known the touch and presence of God, where we have felt all of that, and God said, "Okay, time to leave it all behind and embrace the discomfort and do something new." We've had our comforts disrupted. We faced futures that weren't as well defined as we wanted or hoped. And it turned out okay. It turned out okay enough that we've been here 18 years. Nobody has stood up on a Sunday morning and said, "I asked to have a church meeting. We're going to fire that pastor." Could have happened. It's happened before. I've become a weather wimp. If I go back east and it's 90 degrees and 85% humidity, I get real cranky. And if it's 20 degrees and snowing, I get real nervous. I'm a wimp now. I'm a wimp. More important though, call this place home. When friends have learned that I'm retiring, the first question is, "Where are you going to live?" Oh, so we're staying put. We're staying put because this is home for us. And you've learned to trust me. You've learned to appreciate my ministry. You've shared your hearts and your experiences, your loves, your fears, your pains. And you've trusted me with that. And it has been a wonderful 18 years. But the word has come. You've been circling this mountain long enough. You've been circling this mountain long enough. And I'm retiring. All of us are leaving our comfortable place again. I have to figure out who I'm going to be. I've been giving away books and moving books, and I have to figure out, who am I when I don't have 21 shelves of theological books behind me? I don't know. Who am I when I don't have to think on Tuesday, what's my sermon going to look like for this next Sunday? What am I going to preach about? And you, as Cambridge Drive Community Church, are going to have to figure out who this congregation is. First under Mario's pastorate as an interim, and then under the next seated pastor. And there are spots that I filled in the broader community here. And I'm so thankful that some of you are here today to share this. And the interfaith community is going to have to say, oh wow, well, we've lost our Baptist. Now we've got to find another one. There might be one out there. And the music community, well, they're in for trouble, because now I can be out on Saturday night and not have to worry about what time I get home. I know that all change isn't good. There is no other way to say that. Sometimes change comes and it is painful and destructive and bad. And it's no wonder then that big changes fill us with anxiety. The possibilities are good and bad, and we can't always be sure which ones are coming our way. All we have to do is turn on the news and we can see that every day. The horrible changes that are happening, the bad things that are coming our way. It's become an aphorism. How bad could things be? 2020. Oh yeah. And just when you think it's gotten as bad as it can possibly be, something else happens. The year's not over. I do have to say, we're in Rosh Hashanah now, the Jewish New Year, and the greeting that you give to a Jewish friend is essentially, good year, have a good year. And I said that to some of my Jewish friends, and my first thought was, what a stupid thing to say given everything that's going on. But I think there is implicit in that some faith that, you know what, we got a whole year in front of us and we can do some work and we can bring about some change and we can make some good stuff happen. And I think we can do that. And in spite of fires and climate change and storms and pandemics, there is still room for community and grace, for justice, peace, and hope. The truth is, change is necessary if we're going to end up in the place that God has called us to be. You can't get to the promised land without leaving where you are. We can't make a richer and fuller ministry in this congregation until we step forward and do new things. And in this case, that's going to mean under new leadership. We can't build a more just society that actually fulfills all of the hopes and dreams that we have for it unless we're willing to get off our behinds and do the work and change. To know the fullness of God's touch, we have to leave behind the very place where we have experienced God's touch. Because God's moving on. And we need to go with God. It's scary. It's scary, but it's true. So as individuals, we have to open ourselves to the mysteries of God's call. We have to risk sharing ourselves, being open to seeing with new eyes, willing to trust a new pastor, to share our hopes and dreams with the church leadership, and even to work a little bit so that the next chapter is richer and fuller than the last one was. And it doesn't mean that the last one was bad. It just means there's still room to grow. There's still places to go. And so it will mean, as a congregation, some small changes, perhaps some very large ones, as you discern together what it means to be Cambridge Drive Community Church in this new time and place. It might mean new faces showing up. That's always a scary thing, because they bring new ideas and new ways of seeing and doing. Different experiences and different histories. And the priorities of this congregation will change. They will change. And some of those changes may not be comfortable. Some of them will be things that you'll grieve. And that's okay. That's okay. But God is calling you to leave behind the comfortable place and head north. God is calling me and Cheryl to leave behind our comfortable place and begin to write the next chapter. To move away from those places where we have experienced God's presence, God's touch, God's love, and reach out to find new places and new communities where we will experience God's presence and touch in new and deeper ways. Now, it's probably a little presumptuous to say that we're headed to the promised land. But I am sure as I am sure of anything at all, that God will enrich our lives in ways that we have not expected, in ways that we have not seen coming, in ways that we wouldn't choose perhaps, but they will make us richer and fuller and better people. That will happen to us as individuals, that will happen to us as a community, it will happen to us as a congregation. We've circled this mountain for 18 years. It's a good mountain. It's a good mountain. I love it here. I know the contours of it. I know what it looks like as the sun hits it. I know what it feels like when the sundowners are coming down off that mountain and all of a sudden the temperature goes up and you go, ooh, that's scary. I know what it feels like to turn my back to the mountain and look out and see the ocean there. I know what it's like to go around on the other side of the mountain to see the change in the plants and the topography. And I know all of that, and it is good. But it's time. It's time to leave behind the mountain we've been circling around and move north. And God has something wonderful there for us. We haven't seen it yet. Don't even quite know what it looks like. Could walk right past it and not know maybe. But God is there and calling to us from that place. And God is good.
All the time.
God is good.
All the time.
Let's head north. Let's head north.
Let's hear